That's a microcosm of my entire life, of me making bad decisions and doing crazy things and getting in a lot of trouble, and God stepping in even when I didn't want him to or ask him to or know it. That party I was at, I went with a couple people in my car, but then when it was time to leave, I was so drunk. My drunk friends were telling me, let me drive you home. And I kept telling them, no, it's my car. Drove it here. I'll drive it home. The disgrace that I felt, the humiliation, the shame, the guilt, everything, all my feelings were negative. Everything I did was a reaction out of fear and shame. I believed in God, and I believed God was all-knowing, and I believed God knew everything that I had done, and there was no way God could love me.
To me, you are Uncle Chaz. And that's going to be important for some of our folks to understand that we go way back. You know what Preacher Woody used to tell me? He said, if you ever get to where one night you can't tell your story, don't worry, I'll just step in and tell it for you, because I've already heard it so many times, right? And I think with our relationship with you and me, I was explaining this to Zach not too long ago, that we have both seen each other at our worst. I saw you in your adolescence, right? And you saw me at my worst. And yet today, because we've been through all of that and we've seen each other at our worst, we have this special kind of bond, just like I think, a brotherhood of people that have gone and fought in the trenches together, right? And that's kind of like the beauty of that relationship, is I know so much of your story, but yet when I listened to your testimony a couple of weeks ago, when you shared it at your church, there were things that I hadn't heard. There were things that I didn't know. So that's why it's exciting to do this episode. So you get to tell your story. And of course, I get to learn more about you, my family, and some of my roots as well. If someone only knew you today as the man that you are right now, what would surprise them most about where you came from?
Well, that's funny that that question is, because I think about that a lot in my daily activities at work and at home. And like, my kids have never seen me high, and my work has, a lot of the people have no idea how crazy and insane my life was. And I think it would surprise them, just the pure craziness, the arrests and the fights and all the things that I had done, the car accidents and all of it. Because I've told people who don't know me, my past, and their jaw just drops open and they just like, what? So I'm a different person, and that's a good thing.
You're about 7 years older than me, but really we grew up essentially in the same house most of the time, and we were more like brothers. So, I had a front row seat of a lot of that, as you put it, or maybe even I'll put it, carnage.
Yeah,
right?
It was.
I want to set this up for you, and then you can take this away and start telling your story. But I remember when I was 10 years old, so you were probably about 17, I'm guessing, if I was 10. And I remember we got a phone call in the morning. My mother got a call that you had been in a car accident. And I guess you had been out to a party the night before and had been drinking. And we went to look at the car. You were in the hospital. And we went to look at the car. I think it was a Plymouth Duster, if I remember rightly.
It was.
Plymouth Duster. And later I saw the tree that you hit. And it was unbelievable. I mean, this was like a 4 or 5 foot wide tree, the trunk of it. And I remember looking at that car that day, the morning after the accident, where they had towed it. And I remember being shocked that anybody could survive that car accident. And it really blew me away. It really had me right there, in awe. But I think even when I think about that imagery as a 10-year-old, it's almost like that's a picture of your adolescence. It was just a big wreck, so to speak. So let's dig in to the Charlie story. So tell us about growing up, your childhood. What was that like? You know, we were growing up in Baltimore area. What was that like as a youngster?
Well, I'd like to jump into that story you just told about that Plymouth, because that's a microcosm of my entire life, of me making bad decisions and doing crazy things and getting in a lot of trouble, and God stepping in even when I didn't want him to or ask him to or know it. Because that party I was at that you talked about, I went with a couple people in my car, but then when it was time to leave, I was so drunk. My drunk friends were telling me, let me drive you home. And I kept telling them, no, it's my car. Drove it here. I'll drive it home. And then they started saying, hey, well, let me ride with you anyway. I'm like, are you insane? I'm too drunk. You say I'm too drunk to drive, but you want to ride with me? And I wouldn't let anybody ride with me. And it was like the first time in my life I had ever acted like that. I was just me is the only one I wanted to hurt. And, you know, like some kind of premonition thing. It was God looking out for me all the way, because you saw the car. If anybody was in that car with me, there's no way they'd have survived. You know, the dash was crushed into the seat on the passenger side, and the bumper was hitting the windshield, and I was just a little triangle over on the driver's side that I happened to be in, you know, and just dislocated my shoulder. That's it. But so, you know, I always thank God all the time about that I didn't kill somebody that night, because it would have happened, you know. And I realized that. I didn't realize it so much. Then I joked about it, but now it's real serious. How different my life would have been.
Yeah, definitely on that serious side. But to me, there's also kind of a lighthearted side, in the sense that, it was kind of emotional for me at the time too, because I used to wash your cars for you.
Yeah.
When you went out for dates, you know, and stuff, you would always pay me a few dollars to wash your cars for you. And I remember cleaning that duster up really nice that day. And it looked really good when it went out that night, but it didn't come back looking so good.
No, didn't come back at all. Yeah.
But thank God, like you said, it all could have ended then. And multiple other times, right? Because there was a pattern here in your life. So, tell us about that pattern.
When I was about 10 years old, I believe, I had a friend who his father was a Baltimore City cop and his mom was a stay-at-home mom, and they were pretty strict, but he had the best toys. So I liked going over his house and hanging out with him and playing with his toys, because I didn't have any. And one day I went to his house, and you had to take your shoes off before you went into his house. I stepped in right inside the door, took my shoes off, and a big old roach came crawling out of my shoe. And his mom freaked out, threw me out of the house. I was never welcome back there again. Like she blamed it on me, you know, and I blamed it on my parents, the way that I lived and the way I grew up, because, you know, my house was always dirty. My clothes were dirty, wrinkled. And it was so much shame and guilt for that, for years of that, of just because both my parents were alcoholics. And I will say today that, like, I was so ashamed of my parents and of my life. And that's all I lived with for years and years and years, was shame. That's how I lived in shame. And that's what drove so much of my behavior, to try to fit in with people, to try to be recognized, you know, not to be recognized as the dirty kid or whatever. And so
lots of insecurity.
Oh, that's all I was. I mean, my entire life was ruled by fear. I was afraid of everything, and I was ashamed of everything. And I will say now, I've looked back at my parents, and as ashamed as I was of them and how I blamed them for my life, now I see that they were just sick people, you know, and they loved me. I never, ever felt unloved. I never remember a day of my life that they were alive that they didn't tell me they loved me. And wow. I remember that. That matters to me today. And I know that they were just as sick as I was. And, you know, they just didn't take the opportunity to do anything different and get better. And it affects the way that I parent today. to always try to encourage and not shame, not, put shame or guilt on them for anything. And hold them responsible, hold them accountable, but don't shame them.
Yeah, so all of our experiences have shaped us, right? Our parenting, how we relate to our spouses and all of that. And thank God for his grace that writes a better story than some of those childhood stories of shame and brokenness. Now, thank God for his grace. You've described it as being raised in a bar, and I'm very familiar with that bar because I spent some time there too, with your mother being my grandmother. I know even when I was young, I was, taken to the bar there quite a bit. We'd bowl duck pins, and a lot of times I tell people now about duck pins, and people don't even know what that is. There's a lot of people that know what bowling is, but they have no idea what duck pins are.
Right.
I met a fella in Texas from Maryland in Germany.
Okay.
And we were talking about duck pins, and maybe he's been to the same bar. I don't know. But tell us about being raised, as you put it, in the bar, because you would really, I guess, come home from school, or even when you were little, you spent a lot of time in that bar because it was a regular, everyday lifestyle of your parents, my grandparents.
Yeah, my dad went to work every day, and my mom worked also. And my dad, we had one vehicle, and my dad drove to work, and he would come home from work, and I'd get home from school, and he'd pick me up, from first, second, third grade on to like eighth or ninth grade, maybe seventh or eighth grade. He'd pick me up from as soon as he got home, and we'd drive straight to the bar. And my mom took a bus home from the city from her job, and the bus stop was right in front of that bar. So she'd get off the bus, come in the bar, my parents would meet up, and they'd sit there drinking all night. And, I just would run wild. I mean, there was absolutely no discipline or anything. It was just they'd give me quarters to play all the machines. And when they stopped giving me quarters, I'd go around the bar asking all their friends for quarters. And, as a kid, I thought it was cool as can be. I looked forward to going because I got to play pinball all night and got to play pool, and I got to go bowling, and that was my life for a long time. And then get home, and my parents would go pass out, and I'd hit the streets.
So you said you had so much. You felt loved. You were told you were loved, and there was a lot that you had as well. There was just so much dysfunction in that upbringing. But what do you maybe wish that you had that you didn't have?
Oh my goodness, structure. Because I know that I am who I'm supposed to be, but I believe things would have been so much different if I had structure in my life, because I'd always be I'd go to a school 3 days a week, and the other 2 days I'd play hooky. And that was how it was then when I started working. I'd go to work, a few days a week, and then not go a couple days, and thinking that was okay, and it wasn't. But that was the lessons that I learned growing up, that I had no structure. I had nobody telling me I had to do anything. But all through school, the teachers and the administrators would always tell my parents, every time they'd call them down because of me being in trouble, they'd tell them how much potential I had. And there was never any potential recognized as a young, person, because there was no structure in my life to look at it, to see it, to nourish it. So I was just, and I'm sure if my parents were alive and could tell their part of it all, it would look a lot different to them. But, these are the way that I see it. Just that there was no structure in my life. I did absolutely everything I wanted. If I'd ask my mom for money and she'd say no, and I'd wait till she passed out and I'd take it, and steal it from her or my dad. And it was, I'd steal from my friends. I'd steal from stores. just criminal behavior all the time and no real consequences for a long time.
I'd remember, living in that Glen Burnie neighborhood, Guy Circle. We would be coming home from elementary school when you were a teenager, and it seemed like every day it was like Charlie getting in a fight. Who's he fighting with today? It was a constant. They called you a hellion. By the time you were 18, you're arrested 15 times. What's going on there? What is happening? What's driving that cycle?
Once again, that was the disgrace that I felt, the humiliation, the shame, the guilt. Everything. All my feelings were negative. There was like no positive feelings there, and I fought all the time, as you knew, and it wasn't because I was starting them. It was because I would never back down, and I'd run my mouth, and I'd get beat up all the time. So, but it was fear. I was afraid to fight, but I was afraid to be called a sissy. Every angle was fear. Everything I did was a reaction out of fear and shame. And it's sad when I think back about it. I thought that was all normal, because
right.
of the way I grew up. I thought it was normal. I didn't know things were supposed to be different.
Yeah, I do want us to circle back to that healing part from the fear and the shame and whatnot, because that is such a really critical part of being able to break away, right, from these cycles of delinquency and addiction and dependency and all of that. I remember you had issues with addiction. You did a lot of drugs, a lot of alcohol, right?
At a very young age, too.
At a young age, we're hit with that. Why don't you, for my sake, tell our listeners what you had our Little League team do at practice when you guys wanted to smoke a joint.
Oh, have you run laps, you mean?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I was quite the brat and didn't last long on that team, but
I know. I started out coaching it because you were on it, and I ended up coaching it and you were no longer on it.
Yeah. And I don't remember, was it Chris? I think his name was Chris.
Chris Albergo, yeah.
You guys would we had no idea. I didn't find out till years later. You would have us run all these laps around the school that we were practicing at. I'm just a little guy, and it's taken us like 5, 6, maybe 7 minutes to get around that school and get back to the baseball field. And you guys, every time you wanted to smoke a joint, you would just send us around the school, and we had no idea. So that was my Little League experience with Uncle Chaz as the coach.
Well, we were a terrible team, but you guys were in good shape.
Well, we were in real good shape. Yeah, you weren't, but
Right.
But we were in pretty good shape, right?
Yeah.
You said it in your testimony a couple of weeks ago. You talked about being in a holding cell and having a real, really terrifying moment when trouble, had all caught up to you. And walk us through that moment.
Yeah. And that was a big deal in my life. The judge, I had just turned 18 and had my 4th DUI, DWI, driving while intoxicated, and the judge gave me that was my 3rd, I believe, but the judge gave me some time in jail, and he didn't hardly give me a chance to say anything. And like I said in my testimony, as they grabbed me and were pulling me out of the courtroom, all I could say was, "But judge, what are you doing?" Yeah. "But judge, wait." And they're like, "No waiting, you're gone." And they took me and they put me in this holding cell. And there was 8 or 9 other guys in there, and they're all twice my age. I'm 18 years old, and they were all criminals, and I was a criminal. But I was so afraid. I'll never forget how terrified I was. So afraid, thinking about how I was going to be in jail for the next year, and just terrified. And I believed in God, and I believed God was all-knowing, and I believed God knew everything that I had done, and there was no way God could love me. And I didn't want anybody knowing everything that I had done, so I had done everything I could to just stay away from any kind of talk about God. But in that holding cell, I was so desperate. that I actually got on my knees right there in front of everybody at that middle bench and begged God to help me because I couldn't go to prison. And then the guard showed up at the door and told me, come on, got your retrial. Your lawyer, my public defender, got your retrial. And so I went out of that out of that holding cell back into the courtroom. And I always say that I never looked back over my shoulder, but I bet there was at least a couple of them guys on their knees in that holding cell.
If not the whole holding cell on their knees,
yeah, all of them, maybe. But I went back before that judge, and I told the judge I'd never do it again. And, I laid it all out for him, all the things that could have happened and how I knew and I'd learned my lesson and it would never happen again. And he slapped me on the wrist, gave me more probation, and let me go. And I walked out of that courtroom and thinking I was so slick. I just got over on that judge and, didn't give any credit to God whatsoever. God had nothing to do with it, Yeah. But looking back, I know he had everything to do with it.
Everything.
Because once again, how different would my life have been, But then I did get arrested again for the same thing and got put into the county detention center for a while. So I experienced that also.
So these are teenage years, and then you're still, even after you turn 18, you're getting into trouble, car wrecks. So tell us about maybe that season from, say, 18 to 22. What does Charlie's life look like?
It was just like surviving, basically. They took my driver's license. I had no driver's license, and somehow I could always get a job, but I couldn't keep a job because I do such a good job for 4 days a week. I deserve that 5th day off, in my mind. In my mind, I always thought that way, and I couldn't keep a job that way. So it was just job after job after job and begging people for rides all the time and, spending a lot of time alone and just feeling hopeless and not having any direction or anywhere I wanted to go. My big ambition was to get my license back, but I wouldn't quit drinking and partying to do that. So I just was just languishing, basically. Yeah, and finally it came to a head when I was 23.
There was a defining moment in your life at 23 years old. Yeah, walk us through it.
So I got evicted from the, first of all, I remember when somebody'd knock on my door, I'd have all my lights out and have all the window shades down because it was like the furniture people trying to repossess my furniture all the time. And wow. And that's how I lived, and all the time in fear once again. And finally, they came and took all the furniture. And I remember opening my refrigerator one time, and there was a bottle of ketchup in there, and there was only a little bit in it. And that was it. Uh-huh. And it was like, that's nothing in the cabinets, no crackers, no bread, no, I was barely surviving. And finally, I got evicted, and they got me out of there. There was claw marks on the walls for me holding on, trying not to leave, but I had nowhere to go. And, my sister, Myra, your aunt, she had gotten into a lot of trouble. She was a partier like I was. I'd see her at a party and somebody'd say, "Isn't that your sister?" And I'd say, "Nope, I don't know." I was ashamed of her, and I was worse than she was. And, wow. But, she had gotten into a lot of trouble, and her fiance had committed suicide, and she ended up going into a drug rehab, and she got clean. And she came out of this rehab and started going to NA meetings, Narcotics Anonymous, and she was doing really good. She raising her 2 kids on her own and going to work every day, had a good job, and had my mother move in with her to help my mother out. And I called her and I asked her if I could stay on her couch. At first she said no, because all her friends told her, "Don't let him move in with you. He'll take you for everything you have." And but she, out of the, I think this was God impressing on her heart to give me a place to stay. And I went there, and I literally, all I had was a trash bag of a couple pairs of pants, a couple T-shirts, a couple pairs of underwear, a couple pairs of socks. That was it. Yeah. It was so, I look back on it, I think, I can't believe I lived that way for those years. and living with her and watching her. And I started, like, I was working this part-time job, and I'd go to work and I'd come home and I'd sit around, and I had no license. And then one day I came home and I had a little bit of weed with me, and I had bought a 6-pack of beer, and I took my beer and my weed and I walked back into the woods and sat on a log. I just wanted to be alone. And for the first time in my life, I really, really started thinking about my life. I had little glimpses of, I'd have thoughts about where am I at, or where am I going, or what am I doing, but never anything.
Mm-hmm.
I never followed up with any of those thoughts. It was, I'd push them, I'd bury them, I'd take another drink, I'd do something to not feel, because that's all I wanted to do was not feel. And that's what a big part of the drinking and drugging was all about, is not
Mm-hmm.
feeling. And I sat on that log and I started thinking about my life. I started thinking about from the time I could remember, as young as I could remember, to where I was at that day. And I played my whole life before my eyes. And all I could see, Jimmy, was failure, hurt. I hurt so many people. I failed at everything I touched. I had a lot of good people come into my life, and I couldn't keep any kind of relationship. Because, I'd steal from my friends. I'd run around on my girlfriends. There was just no loyalty in my heart at all. It was all about me and getting what I wanted. And my God, at that time, I'll never forget that feeling of sitting on that log all by myself, just tears running down my face, thinking what a failure I am, and I can't live another day like this, and I'm gonna take myself out. And because I couldn't do it any longer. And then I started thinking a little bit about the funeral, playing the funeral, in my mind, and thinking, okay, my mom would be hurt, and my sisters, and my family. It would hurt other people, and I didn't want to hurt anybody else at that time. And then suddenly, I just got this feeling like I don't want to die. I do not want to die. And I just started crying and begging God to help me. And I reached out to God as sincere as I ever had in my life, with tears dripping off my chin. And I never let anybody see me cry. And I was a mess. I was just emotional basket case. And all I knew is that I just begged God to help me. I didn't know what to ask for. I didn't know how. I didn't know how anything could change and it could be different. I didn't know how He could help me. I just had this deep down belief that He was the only one that could help me, and that I had no chance if I didn't have God. And then suddenly I got this little spark inside of me. And, if you've ever felt like that, and you get a little bit of hope all of a sudden. And I didn't know why or where it came from or what it could be about. But once again, I thought that drugs were my problem, because I started looking and saying, okay, every time I made a bad decision, I was high, but I was always high. So I always made bad decisions. But I couldn't fathom blaming it all on me. I had to blame it on something else, because that's all I did my whole life. It was always somebody else's fault, no matter what. And at this time, I was like, what can I do? And I got this little hope of wanting to live. And all of a sudden, my sister Myra came into my mind. Like, look at her, and it was wild, because living with her, I never looked at how good she was doing until that moment. All of a sudden it hit me as look at where she was and where she's at today. And, so, and I went in, and it was a Sunday night, and I asked her to take me to a meeting the next day. And I always say, I think my mom was doing backflips about that, because, she knew that I needed help. And so that next day, December 1st, 1985, I went to my first meeting, and I haven't used a drink or a drug since then. And wow. I had no intention of quitting drinking and drugging. I just went to a meeting that night, so I didn't drink and drug, and then people took me out to eat. And then I went to a meeting the next night, and then people took me out to eat. And then the next night, my phone was ringing, people asking me if they can come get me and take me to a meeting. And it was a lot of help, a lot of people reaching out to me just because I showed up that very first time. And, I look at the sequence of events of how all that came about between me asking my sister to take me to a meeting, and then her taking me, and her introducing me to some people, and then them people helping me and introducing me to more, and then those people helping me. And it took off.
So 9 months later, 9 months after December of 1985, so we're talking about 1986.
1986, the middle of 1986, I ended up giving my life to Jesus Christ. I had gone to a church one day, and then after church, this old black guy, Willie, he was like 90, and he came and talked to me in my apartment, and he made so much sense, and all the things that he said, and it like opened my mind and my heart to what I needed to do. And, I wanted to give my life to Jesus. I wanted to have some direction in my life. I wanted all the things that he had told me that I could get. So I went to church that Sunday, and I ended up getting baptized there, and confession to the church. This is what I want. And I was saved. So
you're about 24 years old at that time?
Yeah, I was 24.
And so you're 24, and I'm 7 years younger. So at that same time, as you're giving your life to Christ, I'm probably at the pinnacle of my despair, or the bottom of the pit, more like, rather than the pinnacle, is like the bottom of the pit. I remember when I tried to take my life, I didn't know this until many years later either. I really had no hope left, none at all. And when I took all the drugs that I took, I really believed that I was going to step into some kind of, peaceful state of euphoria or something. I don't know. I just knew that what I was living in felt like such a hell to me that I had no fear of the afterlife. But I was told later, I always knew that a Catholic priest had come in, I think a nun or something, and they had begun to read like the last rites, I guess, or whatever, because I was that close. And I was told that you were pushing them out of the room, saying he's not going to die today. And when I heard that, it's never left me that you fought for me when I couldn't fight for myself. And that to me is like a key to why God did spare my life, because somebody was believing for me. I know my grandmama, your mama, was praying for me. And I always talk about her in my testimony because I know she was praying for me when I didn't know how to pray for myself. God listened, God answered. People that did love me when I didn't recognize that they loved me. And here is God doing a work in your life. You're getting saved, and I'm coming to the end of my ropes. And then, not long, maybe a year later, I ended up getting saved in a juvenile detention center. And God was doing a whole really cleansing restoration in our whole family, because there had been so much drama, and people, maybe little by little started to come clean, get healed, reconciled with things. And I thank him that in my family, we've seen God's redemption. You got involved with the recovery, with NA or A. I don't know which one, you favored more, but you stuck with that. So in addition to, going to church and being a believer, you also practiced steps of recovery. And I think that's really important. Back then we probably didn't have things like the Celebrate Recovery, where there was, Christian centered or worship centered program that emphasized the recovery steps. But you had these meetings that you could go to. You had people you could relate to, people that would hold you accountable, people that would fight for you maybe when you couldn't fight for yourself sometimes, right? And that's a brotherhood. But why don't you share just some of those recovery steps, maybe, or principles, whatever you want to call them, that were essential in your journey in recovery and finding yourself?
I truly believe this, that I wasn't ready for a relationship with God. He was ready for a relationship with me, but I wasn't ready. And he gave me NA, Narcotics Anonymous, to go to those meetings. And for 9 months, I went to those meetings and I stayed clean all the times I wanted to use. And I made a lot of mistakes. And I found out quitting using the drugs was actually easier than quitting the lifestyle, the whole lifestyle that I lived.
Okay.
And it took a lot of work, and a lot of, people, like you said, holding me accountable. Don't go to the same places. Don't go to the old places. Don't hang out with the old people. Do a lot of things differently, everything differently, basically. I only had to change one thing, and that was everything. And I believe that God brought me into a relationship with him in a very delicate, nurturing, loving way, that it took me getting clean and talking about God with other people and seeing God work in other people's lives so strongly that I was willing to start a relationship with God.
So what you're talking about is maybe something that, like a breakaway, we might call a safe space, creating spaces, right, where kids or young people can come in and just feel like they belong, feel like they have a place where they can talk about who they are and what their struggles are. And oftentimes that gets overlooked, right? Mm-hmm. And it sounds like maybe that's kind of what you're describing as what maybe NA and some of the people that you were doing meetings with provided for you.
Absolutely. I learned about being honest and about being accountable. And I could tell another man that I loved him, could look another man in the eye and tell him I loved him, because I did. I just, everything that I believe, God gave me, that for 20 years, I dedicated my life to nothing but NA. I mean, I traveled to Canada, to Mexico. I've been to world conventions. I've been in meetings in other countries. I've met people all over the world, from all over the world at world conventions. I've done a lot of work, and I believe that was kind of my calling, for 20 years. I've always had that desire since I got clean and then got saved to help other people. But I am self-centered. I am selfish. I am a lot of negative things when I'm left to my own devices. I need to pray all the time. So and to invite people into my life all the time. Jim, I get thoughts in my head, and I believe the enemy talks to me at times, and he does it in my own voice. So it sounds so convincing, and it sounds so reasonable, some of the things that I think. And then I tell another person about it, and they go, what? And so I just need people in my life, and I need to be held accountable at all times.
We all do, don't we? Yeah. The first thing in a recovery program, you're going to come in and you have to admit that you're an addict, right? And oftentimes that's the hardest thing for an addict to do. But you can't go any further until you start with, something's wrong with me. I'm not right. And that's really our sin nature, right? And that's what the word says, is that we have all sinned, we've all fallen short. And maybe someone is not an alcoholic, maybe they're not a drug addict, and they're not a gangbanger or a prostitute, but yet we have all fallen short. We've all sinned, and these are the only terms that we can come to God on, his terms. And until we begin there, no ounce of religion can help us. And maybe somebody listening to this really needs to hear that right now, because religion can be your worst enemy if you're not willing to admit that you are broken, that you are a sinner, that you need a savior, and that Jesus died on the cross for all of your sins, not one or two, but all of them. And that's where we have to begin in our relationship with God, is maybe we can say it this way, admitting that we are the problem.
Yeah.
Which is what my wife always reminds me.
Yeah. Well,
you are the problem.
yeah. Well, with that, in NA, there was something that I learned a long time ago, and that was that there's a lot of people who need the meetings, but it only works for the people who want the meetings. And that's the same way with a relationship with God. You have to want it. You have to do your part.
Yeah.
I can't just bury my head in the sand and say, God, do this,
I'm just so thankful for the man that you grew into. And I wanted us to maybe even talk about some of that now, bring it kind of to today with family, right? You're a father, you're a husband, grandfather now. I like to tell young people, God doesn't just save us from something, he saves us for something.
Oh, yeah.
And when he intervenes in our lives, it's like, I'm not just saving you from hell. I'm not just saving you from your past, although he does that. But the plan and the purpose that he has for our lives. And like you said, we don't get that unless we want it. And I look at you today and I see your family and I see just a beautiful picture of redemption, of what God has done in your life. So
amazing.
Tell us how God has maybe even enabled you to overcome the past and get to the place where now you look at what you have every day and you're like, this is God's blessing.
It is. And prayer is such an important part of my life today. And, when I got married in Baltimore and moved to Tennessee 20 years ago, and my first wife, as you know, passed away suddenly. And that was the hardest thing I had ever gone through. And, I just saw God's love in that the whole time, with so many people nurturing me and reaching out to me and loving on me and telling me it's going to be okay and just being there for me and, bringing me meals. And I mean, I was so devastated. It's the hardest thing I've ever been through. And, I got through all that, and then I healed some from that. And then I met my wife, Wanda, and, with her came a whole lot of change in my life. Excuse me. She had those two little girls, and, I've adopted them basically. And I'm so grateful that they didn't have to live the way that I lived, that Wanda and I gave them structure and let them know they were loved no matter what. And now Abby's 24 years old with a 8-year-old son, and he's just the best thing ever, Brantley. And Emma is 19, and she just had a baby, and he is the cutest little thing. And Wanda had a step granddaughter, and so I have another granddaughter and grandson there, and they have kids, so that's where the great grandkids come in. And those two great grandkids are just, I mean, it's amazing. Like, I have so much love in my life. Those little kids, when they see me, they come running and jump in my arms and yell, Papa. And my kids, when I come home from work, come running to me and jump in my arms and yell, Papa. And, and then, and every day I get up and I tell them I love them every day, because that's what how I remember how important that was, later in life, to hear that. I knew that I heard that every single day, that I was loved. And that's the most important thing for me, is to let them know that they are loved. Mm-hmm. Going to the meetings, and we had met this young man, Wanda and I, and he had a son. He was a single dad. Son was, I think, about 3, Brantley and Braylon. And one day he called me and he said, hey, I need somebody to watch my kid. The place that's watching him, they're drug dealers in and out all day. And I'm like, oh, that's not good. Call Wanda. She's not working at the moment. She might be able to help you. I came home that day and there's this little blue-eyed, blonde-haired kid staring up at me. And so we started taking care of this kid. And, like, his dad was doing good. He was staying clean, and he was doing really good. He'd, like, go on trips for NA and stuff. So we'd keep this kid 3, 4, 5 days at a time at times. And we had him all the time, and we just loved him to death. Well, then he got together with another lady from NA and that we knew, and they had another boy, and his name's Adrian. And then they got pregnant again and had another baby when Adrian was 17 months old. Chaz was born. And this is just the most amazing part of my life is, like, Chaz was born and they had to fly him to Vanderbilt to have this surgery to save his life. And even then, the surgeons told his parents, don't have any expectations about him coming out of this surgery. He probably won't make it. But he made it. And, I knew about the situation, but I didn't really know what was really going on. And then Wanda came and sat me down, and she said, the state is stepping in and taking custody, all three boys. The biological grandfather took the oldest one, but the two youngest ones have nowhere to go. And she said, can we do it? And I kept thinking about my dad was old, and I told God, like, I don't ever want to do that to a kid. Everybody thought he was my grandfather all the time. And God laughed out loud at me and said, here you go. And so I told Wanda, I'm too old to be raising a newborn and a 17-month-old toddler. And she, talked about it some more and played on my heartstrings. And she said, please. And, they'd have nowhere to go. So I finally said, temporarily, we will do it under one condition. I do not change any diapers. And she agreed. Done. She said done right away. And we, this little baby came home, this little roly-poly baby came home from the hospital. And I still have a picture on my desk right now of us being at your house with your mom. And just before Christmas, when the baby was, 4 months old or so, and 4 or 5 months old.
Yeah.
And, man, these kids, these boys, like, I've seen a lot of kids, but these two, because they were getting ready to go into state's custody and be separated, and who knew where they would go. And I think about it today, and tears come to my eyes thinking about what could have happened to these two little kids that I love with all my heart,
Yeah.
And I thank God he impressed it upon me to step up and to be there for these two little boys. And it was just temporarily. And 3 years later, the judge asked Wanda and myself if we'd be willing to take permanent custody and keep them until they're 18. And we said, absolutely. So we're 9 years into it. We're halfway there. But these boys have given me, like I said, NA and helping other addicts was my purpose in life. And now these boys are my purpose in life.
When I think about our family, because I've studied our ancestry, and I know you have a bit too, but when I look at your parents, who were my grandparents that I really grew up with around most of the time, there was a lot of brokenness in their lives, but
oh yeah,
they came from really rich heritage on both sides. East Tennessee, Western North Carolina, a lineage of preachers and missionaries and educators, university teachers, and really on both sides of that family. And there, there were some things that happened that we can't make sense of, whatever reasons there were. But when my pop-up, your dad left Tennessee, we know that there was a very difficult time in their lives, and we don't know what led to their addiction and their alcoholism and these things. But there was a breach. There was a breach in what I have studied and learned to be a very rich, godly heritage. But I know that at some point, my grandmother, your mother, turned back to the faith of her childhood, faith in Jesus. And I know her prayers were a part of my redemption. I just am so grateful that breach has now been restored, so to speak. Isaiah, I believe it's Isaiah 58 in the Old Testament, where the prophet talks about they will be restorers of the breach. And even though there was a breach, it's like God has shown me that wasn't their story. That was something that they fell into. But it wasn't where they came from, and it wasn't where they were going. And now we see God's handprints of redemption all across our family. And I just have to feel like somewhere they're celebrating.
I know it. I know they are.
It's a beautiful story of redemption. Back when you were young, you said this, that my grandfather, your dad, they really didn't go to church when you were growing up, but maybe a couple of times a year, maybe Christmas and Easter, and maybe the occasional funeral.
Yeah, basically the funeral. That was about it.
Just the funeral. And you talked about that one time when you went to a funeral with your dad.
I was sitting there next to him, and they were talking about the gentleman that had passed away, and they said, at the end, they said he was a good man and a good father. And my dad didn't look at anybody. He was just kind of staring straight ahead, and he said, that's all I ever want him to say about me. And, I was a young boy, and I don't remember much relationship with my father, but I remember that vividly.
Yeah,
and
I bet.
And that's how I feel today. I just want to be a good man and a good father. That's how I want to be remembered.
Well, I wanted to ask you that. Maybe you can even take that a little step further as we close this episode. But what does Charlie want his legacy to be? A good man, a good father, faithful to Jesus, I'm sure. You want to finish your race well?
Yeah, that's everything in a nutshell right there. My family, my relationship with Jesus is the most important thing in my life. And then my relationship with my family. And it's all about relationships. And, like when I got clean, I learned in the first 90 days how not to use drugs. I've spent the next 40 years learning how to deal with my emotions and feelings and live life and treat other people. And, and that all goes hand in hand with my relationship with Jesus. It's just enhancing that and growing that. And, I want people to see the love of Jesus when they look at me and when they think about me. And I want my kids to say he was a good dad.
Me too. Me too.
Yeah.
So, Chaz, last thing. Maybe there's someone right now that's listening and they got kind of called in and captivated by your story. And maybe that's a person who feels trapped and they can relate to those things that Charlie went through. But right now, that's what they are going through. And that's their current reality. What could you say to someone right now who maybe feels hopeless or just trapped, that shame, failure, addiction, just a state of lostness?
Well, the absolute first thing I would say to do would be pray. God hears you. I know that without a doubt. I am, 100% positive that God hears our prayers. I believe God hears me. I pray in the shower. I pray driving down the road. I pray sitting at my desk. I pray sitting on the couch. I pray everywhere and anywhere. And I believe God hears every single prayer. But when I get on my knees and pray, it's not because I think that's the only way God's going to hear me. I do that because that makes me focus on what is. It tunes everything, all the outside noise out. All of a sudden, when I'm on my knees, I can it's just like me sitting face to face with Jesus, Yeah. And I'm that focused on what I want to talk about. But then after that, don't wait for a burning bush to tell you what to do. Start asking for help. If you're in addiction, find a meeting, find some kind of anonymous meeting to go to and talk to people there. If it's, emotional distress, find some counselors, and I think any church would be the best place to start, to go and ask questions. Where can I get the help I need? Because, they might not even know what kind of help they need. They just know they need help. And that's the thing. Admit that we do need help and ask for it.
Ask God for guidance, where to go, but seek it out. And Jesus taught us to knock and the door will be open. Seek and you will find. Ask and it will be given to you. So I think that's what we're hitting on here is that take action, do something, and watch God God meet you and answer those prayers.
Amazing. He is truly, truly amazing.
Well, thank you for your heart, Chaz. Thank you for your story. Thank God for what he's done in your life. I thank God for my family and what he's done in my family with redemption.
Yeah, and we should do a podcast on you, Jimmy, and your life. And I've never seen God work so much as he has and through you and through your family, and how amazing your story is.
Well, that could be a pretty messy podcast episode. And we'll save for another time too the family riot in the front yard of Grandma's house.
Yeah, more fighting.
What a story that is. But God's brought us through a lot, hasn't he?
He has. Yeah,
Amen.
That is great.